Hello, and welcome to Shaking and Sipping. This is the show where we shake, or today stir up a cocktail or other mixed drink, talk a bit about its history, then give it a sip, and see how it comes out. We're continuing our quest to work through the IBA's official list of cocktails to see how those stand up and look at their selections a bit. We're in the unforgettable section, and this week's unforgettable is the Negroni. Now, the Negroni is one of my absolute favorite drinks, which won't be a shock to longtime viewers once we talk about what the components of it are. But first, we need to talk a bit about its history. Now, the long-time accepted history for this drink is that in 1919, there was someone in Italy. He was called Count Camillo Negroni, and he was visiting his local bar, which is the Cafe Giacosa, I believe. And while there, he wanted something like an Americano, and we'll talk about that a bit further in a bit, but he wanted it to be punched up a bit, so they swapped the seltzer for gin, and we had a Negroni. Now, this is a great story. It's been around for a long time. That bar was famous for them. There's a bar like across the street or something that was also famous for them, and one of their bartenders wrote about the drink in a book, and so on and so forth. Little problem. In more recent years, the Negroni family, which still exists and is this old, noble family going back to the 10th century or something, did some research and said they can't find any record of someone named Count Camillo Negroni living in Italy around that time. Just not a person who exists. Which is a bit of a problem. However, they said, don't you worry, it still belongs to the Negroni family, just a slightly different branch. Their story is that the French Corsican general, who was called Pascal Olivier, he was the Comte de Negroni. He was a general in what I like to call Napoleon III's whoopsie, also known as the Franco-Prussian War, and apparently led some important charges there. He was a prisoner of war in that war for a while, and then he bounced around a bit. He was in the then French colony of Senegal for a while, doing all kinds of stuff. And apparently he created this drink independently, and began to share it around at some officers' clubs and things once he was late in his military career or after retiring from his military career, and he called it his vermouth-based cocktail, and he was very proud of it. This guy did exist, so we have that going for us. There's some letters that the family has discovered to this effect, so that is their proof for it. They're a little bit shaky as well because of the exact timing of them, and some of the vocabulary used in the letters doesn't seem to be right for when those letters should have been written. But it's possible, it could go back to him. However, if we think about this drink a little bit, which as I've alluded to is in the same family as the Americano, the Boulevardier, and the Mito. We covered all of those in the Americano and Boulevardier episodes, where we started off with the Mito, which was Campari and a more bitter vermouth, such as Punta Mess, and then that evolved into the Americano, where you have Campari and Italian vermouth and some seltzer water, and then the Boulevardier, where you sub the seltzer water for whiskey. This sort of stuff was already happening, and so it turns out that while this is slightly later than when the Comte de Negroni supposedly created the drink, this drink shows up in lots of cocktail books in the 30s, in the 40s, under all different names. It's not called the Negroni. Some of them use the same ratio as the Negroni does today. Some of them use slightly different ratios, but that's true of drinks like the Boulevardier as well. What's really interesting is that one of these drinks dates all the way back to 1929. There's a reference to the current proportions of the Negroni under a different name in 1929 in a French cocktail guide. That's only 2 years after the Boulevardier was created. So perhaps one of the Negroni family, whether the French side or the Italian side, did invent this drink independently at some point. Perfectly willing to believe that, and clearly their name stuck to it, so certainly some of them must have liked it and ordered it quite a bit. But it seems like this drink has been evolved multiple times by various bartenders and is really just an extension of what was already happening with Americanos, Boulevardiers, etc. throughout the place. So, with all of that out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about actually making this drink. We're going to do 3 variants today. We're going to do the IBA spec, we're going to do something that is fairly similar to the IBA spec, and then we're going to do something totally different. All right, let's make the first one. All right, we're going to start off with a big ice cube in a little rocks glass here. IBA shows it with a big cube, so that's how we're going to do it. I kind of like this drink with smaller cubes, but that's neither here nor there. And then we're going to start with our ingredients. So first, we want vermouth. I'm not always a huge fan of Martini and Rossi. I think in this drink, my favorite Dolon Rouge is a little bit underpowered and gets lost in it. I think if you were using a fairly mild gin like Aviation, perhaps that would actually work well. But with a more traditional assertive gin, I think that Martini and Rossi does a decent job. I think there are some others that would work well also, but for what I have in stock, that would be my choice. We want 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of our Italian vermouth. We then want 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of my favorite spirit, Campari. Finally, we want 1 ounce or 30 milliliters of a London Dry Gin. I'm using my general go-to, which is Bombay Classic. Anything fairly traditional London Dry would work great here. This is a great spot for a Tanqueray, a Beefeater, a Gordon's. Any of those are going to play well in this drink. All right, that's the basic drink, so we're just going to give that a very brief stir just to mix and chill. And then for the garnish, some folks like to do just a lemon zest or twist. The IBA spec and the way they typically make it in Italy calls for an orange wedge. So we're just going to go ahead and plop that straight in the drink. And this is our IBA spec Negroni. So off the nose I get a lot of that orange, and then I get just a little bit of some kind of a darker fruit note, which is mostly the vermouth, probably a little bit of the Campari working along there as well, kind of red fruits, dark fruits. So that's so nice. So a lot of Campari, a lot of bitterness, the kind of cinchona flavor really forefront, but then you get that gin hit toward the back, that nice little bit of juniper and just slight bit of alcohol pops it toward the back of the throat. Yeah, the vermouth is there. It's very mid-palate, and it's there throughout, and it's adding just a nice sweetening element, and that's where I think the Dolon, which is slightly more herbal, a little bit less hard-hitting, I think would get lost a little bit, and I think that the Martini actually works well here. It doesn't really add complexity, but that's adding the sweetness we need to balance the drink out. It's a great drink. It's refreshing, it's bitter, it's crisp, it's just a little bit sweet. Huge fan of this drink, would highly recommend it. All right, on to variant number 2. This is the Negroni Tredici. I am following the recipe for this from Difford's Guide. As I said, I prefer this with a few ice cubes. I think 4. It will dilute a bit faster, but I like the look and feel of it in this drink for some reason. I like the lemon or the orange in there, like that. So anyway, this is a similar to the classic drink. We're going to switch a few things up. First, I'm going to use Ford's gin, a little less juniper, but a little more complex botanically, which I think is going to play well with the other change I'm going to make here. We're also bumping this up. We're going from 30 milliliters, or 1 ounce, to 60 milliliters, or 2 ounces. And for some reason I've built this one exactly out of order. Not sure why I've done that. All right, and then we are going to again add the same Martini and Rossi sweet vermouth in the same proportion. We want 1 ounce. It's 30 milliliters. So this drink is going to punch a little more, obviously being gin forward, but since I've used a slightly more complex, slightly softer gin, I think that will balance out really nicely. And then our big change is instead of using just Campari, we're going to split between 2 different Campari products. We're going for a 1/4 ounce each, so 7.5, 8 milliliters. First of our Campari. And then of a product we have not yet discussed on the show. This is Cynar, also made by Gruppo Campari. And this is an Amaro whose dominant, or at least most interesting flavor, is artichoke, hence the picture on the label. There are other artichoke Amari on the market. This is sort of the classic one. Also, it is pronounced Cynar because that's how you'd pronounce it if it was an Italian word. I take slight umbrage with that because that's not the Italian word for artichoke. The name comes from the Latin genus name for artichokes, so it should be pronounced Cynar. But Gruppo Campari pronounces it Cynar, and if they'd like to sponsor the show, I will stop complaining about it. In the meantime, they make great products. And so again, we're going to just give that a quick stir. And on this one, we're going to do a 2-piece garnish. First, we're going to take a strip of lemon. We're going to go ahead and express that. And discard. And then we will also throw in our orange slice. And this is a Negroni Tredici. Nose is a little bit more muted. I think it's more complicated rather than more muted would be right to say. So very different drink, much sharper, much less bitter. There's an interesting note, sort of mid-palate. I can't really place what that flavor is. It's something that the Cynar is doing in cahoots with the gin botanicals, right in the middle of the palate. The front of the drink is sort of a little bit of a mess, and I think that the Martini and Rossi is maybe just a hair heavy for this application, because the very front of the drink, I'm not sure what's happening. It's slightly sweet, it's slightly herbaceous, it's just a little bit unclear. And then as it rolls back, you get this Cynar gin botanical thing happening. The Campari is just keeping everything from going too sort of sweet and syrupy, and the vermouth is keeping everything sweet. It's really nice. I like it. It's not gonna knock a classic Negroni out of my repertoire though, but highly recommended. All right, before we go to the final variant we're making today, just one variant I want to shout out that I'm not gonna make, and that is the white Negroni, or the Negroni Bianco. It's a really cool drink that I was unable to source components for, unfortunately. It is the same proportions as a Negroni, except you're swapping the vermouth for Lillet Blanc, and you're swapping the Campari for Suze. I love Suze. I've mentioned it in one of the IBA in the real world posts before. It's this really cool gentian liqueur. Love that product. It is not available at any store in the state of Washington as far as I can see. So it's a great product though. If it's available in your area, A, try it, and B, take a road trip to Washington and bring me a bottle. All right, for our final variant, I'm gonna go back to the big cube because there's no slice of anything in this one. And this one is called the Agboni. And this was created by the German mixologist Bastian Heusser. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. I'm not very good with German. But I got it from Paul Clark. It was on his blog Cocktail Chronicles some time ago, which, good news, is back online. He's not writing it anymore, but for a while it wasn't online, and now it is. So yeah, we are going to swap everything for this one, or at least everything except for the Campari. That's kind of crucial to any drinks in this family. All right, we're going to start off with some orange bitters. I'm using the Scrappies today. Got a little bit of a cool, I don't even know what it is, but it's a slightly barreled flavor that I think is going to go really well in this. You want about 2 dashes, but this dashes pretty slowly, so I went with 3. And then we are going to go ahead and use some sweet vermouth again, but here The creator of the drink actually recommends the Antica formula, and I think the vanilla here is going to make a ton of sense when you see what else we're doing with this drink. This is a little bit of a smaller drink for some reason. It's still equal parts, but for whatever reason, he's decided to make it as 3/4 ounce pours. So that's 22.5, 23 milliliters, give or take. And so obviously the same of the Campari. And then finally, for our base spirit, you want a fairly nice Blanco tequila. Now this is where I think the vanilla is going to play really nicely with some of the notes that are in tequila. And this is Espolòn. It's not the best tequila in the world, but it is a pretty good one, especially at the price point. I'm a big fan of their Blanco and their Añejo. Their Reposado is good, but I think you can do better for the money. I think on both their Blanco and their Añejo, fairly hard to beat at the price point. And then once again, we're going to give that a nice stir. And then this one, we are going to serve with a nice grapefruit twist. I want a fairly substantial one here. But you could actually hear the oil squeeze out of that one. I like to see that. And this is our Agboni. Ooh, so nose is interesting. I get a bunch of the grapefruit, obviously, because they just expressed that. But then I get this really, I don't even know, almost tart smell. Oh, what a cool drink. I have never tried this one before. So the vanilla comes forward right away in the Antica. It hits and then it lingers and sort of raises in the palate. The Campari's there the whole time, really nice bitterness. And the tequila is right in the middle. It's slightly bright. It gives you this really fresh sort of taste with also some dark notes to it as well. So it's almost like if somehow fresh grass and leather merged into one thing. It's really crisp, but then sort of immediately goes dark and falls back into the vanilla that the Antica formula is giving us. I love this. I don't know if it's going to outstrip a Negroni for me because it's slightly less Campari forward and I can just drink Campari instead of water. But this is a really cool drink. Highly recommend you give this one a try. Well, thanks so much for coming along with me as we explored a few different types of Negronis and talked a bit about their history. If you enjoyed the video, or at least got through it okay, I desperately appreciate a like, share, subscribe, comment, and all that other YouTube things. Go immediately watch every other video on the channel. You can visit shakingandsipping.com, which will also be linked below, for the blog where we write up each one of these drinks, as well as most weeks write up the next day what happens when we go to a quality cocktail bar here in Seattle and order the drink, see if they have some variants on it, see if they make it often, what else we can glean about the drink in that sort of real-world experience. You can also follow on Twitter at shaking_sipping for updates on when we're doing one of those IBA in the real worlds and other Twitter sort of announcements. That's all I've got for you today on the Negroni, but we will, of course, be back on the blog tomorrow with the IBA in the real world, and we'll be back next week for the next cocktail on the IBA list. Until then, happy sipping. Cheers.